Yes, hi, Bev. It did become inevitable because the Democratic Party forced it to become inevitable more than 3 weeks since that debate performance of Biden's. The Democratic Party has been talking about itself, publicly assailing Joe Biden, meaning that the party wasn't competing against Donald Trump, wasn't engaging in an election campaign, and was simply publicly flagellating its own candidate. So every passing day that continued, they wore down their own candidate and gave Donald Trump a free pass. So they had forced this into an inevitability for Joe Biden, and he's now bowed to that. It's not, to answer your second question, it's not inevitable that Kamala Harris becomes the nominee. She's by far the front runner, having won the endorsement of Joe Biden. But we hear just in the last few minutes that at least one centrist Democrat, Joe Manchin, has said he's examining his options and looking at the process. And although a lot of Democrat royalty, if I can call them that, like the Clintons, have endorsed Kamala Harris, Barack Obama, notably, has stayed silent on the subject. He has not endorsed her, saying his supporters saying he apparently wants to keep himself above the fray, implying that there could yet be a fray, and there could be. But they don't have much time, Bev. The Democrat convention is in under a month, and in some states, early voting begins in September. And they're introducing a candidate about whom the American public knows very little. So the Democrats have an enormous job to do to bring Kamala Harris to the American people and to make her an appealing candidate to compete with Donald Trump.
And, you know, I'm so interested in your opinion because you're watching this when many others are not. What is your assessment of her? She seemed to have a very low profile as vice president.
Yes, she did. And that's traditional of course, for vice presidents. Presidents usually keep their vice presidents, push them
in
under
check.
a rock somewhere. Yes. They remain, they get all the attention. But in some ways, the jobs that he has given Kamala Harris as vice president have not helped her and have in fact tainted her. For example, one of her prime jobs has been responsibility for what Biden called the root causes of illegal immigration. Donald Trump has jumped on that and called her the border czar, trying to associate her with an extremely contentious, very unpopular immigration policy, which has allowed millions of immigrants to cross the border into the US under Biden's term. This is a huge liability. It's an absolutely radioactive policy in the US at the moment. And even though Joe Biden tried to implement a legislative fix in the Congress, Trump prevailed upon Republicans to stop that, to prevent that, to allow the problem to keep running, to give Trump the issue to campaign on. And now he's trying to use that connection to Kamala Harris to campaign against her. And that is a big problem for her.
Yeah. And, you know, Pet, the US is such a divided nation. We now have potentially a woman of colour. So there are two things that potentially could really split voters, particularly if Donald Trump jumps on that bandwagon. Do you expect him to exploit that?
Yes, he will exploit that. There is nothing that he won't exploit. He's already used some pretty cheap lines with her. He's called her that. He said that his nickname for her is Laughin' Kamala. He says, "Have you ever watched her laugh? She's nuts." So, you know, it's kind of playground insults. And in some ways, this will work against the Democratic ticket. So, for example, Donald Trump's main constituency is white, working class people, men in particular. Joe Biden had a white, working class background. So that will heighten the contrast. But you could expect, and there'll be a lot of polling in the days to come, Bev, it's a bit early just yet, but you could expect that the person of Kamala Harris will energise a lot of women to vote. And as you put it, a lot of coloured voters to get into the arena. Remember, the US election is all about turnout. It's about motivating voters to get out on a Tuesday, a working day, and get to the polls. So that could well be a motivating factor. The other way that this opens up the contrast or sharpens the contrast between Trump and the Democrat candidate is that Kamala Harris is seen as much more left-wing, left-leaning, in the American term, liberal.
Yes, indeed, but that might be something that Trump tries to exploit enormously. You know, I think it's important to reflect on Joe Biden. Admittedly, we did see quite a bit of decline in those, just almost suddenly in these last 6 months or so. But he has been indefatigable on the world stage. Some say he's done more than many presidents have done in 2 terms. What's your assessment?
Yes, well, the 2 big themes have been China and the Indo-Pacific and Russia and Ukraine. And Kamala Harris it's important, I think, to point out, has been very solidly with Biden on both those policies in both those arenas. She has criticised China on a number of fronts. She's travelled to an island in the contested area of the Philippines, for example, which is now the cutting edge of Chinese Communist Party intrusions and assertions over other countries' waters in the Indo-Pacific, and she's defended the Philippines against China. She's criticised China's human rights conduct in Hong Kong. She's been solid on the Ukraine question, and we could expect those policies to continue. So Biden has been very firm on those 2 areas. She has stepped that up, and she's also called for a continuation of the so-called de-risking of the US economy and technology sectors from China. So you're right, Biden has been a solid performer and a very active performer in those arenas, and she would continue that. If there's a point of discontinuity on a major issue, she's expected, I emphasise, to be more critical of Israel and more supportive of Palestinians in Gaza. Netanyahu arrives in the US today, so we might see that position highlighted very soon. But overall, this is a huge leap into the dark for the Democrats. All the polling that's available and analysis that's available shows that she brings no obvious advantage and leaves the Democratic ticket where it was, no better, perhaps slightly worse than it was yesterday.
Yeah, indeed.
Huge risk, we'll see.
You're a man of impeccable timing, Mr. Archer, how you landed in the US for these 2 weeks.
They say it's a great time to be in Washington, but Bev, it's always a great time to be in Washington.
This is true, and you love it more than most. Good to see you. Thanks so much.
Pleasure, Bev.